Hey everyone, I'm Pastor Alec,
I'm Eli.
and today we are continuing our walk through Second Kings. So,
Yeah.
Eli, we've made it quite a ways at this point. So, what
Yeah.
do you have for me today? What you been reading?
So I've been reading 17
Okay,
17 and 18 and going down to verse 21.
okay,
Um, when he tore Israel away from the house of David, they made Jeroboam, son of Nebat, their king. Jeroboam enticed Israel away from following the Lord and caused them to commit a great sin. Is this referring to the split after David and when
yeah,
Jeroboam rose to power?
yeah. This is telling the whole story because if you go back to verse 6, in the ninth year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria. And he carried the Israelites away to Assyria and placed them in Halah, and on the harbor on the Habor, the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. So that sentence right there is a major event. We call it like a
Right.
crisis point for the Old Testament. Is the fall of the northern kingdom by the hands of Assyria, and so
Right.
now you've got this. And this occurred because the people of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up out of the land of Egypt from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and feared other gods and walked in the customs of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel, and in the customs that the kings of Israel had practiced. Okay? And so it tells the whole story, really, that we've been talking
Right.
about.
Well, I was just wondering, is it like placing the whole blame on Jeroboam? Or not the
Well,
whole blame, but like the start
well,
of
if
the.
yeah, this is kind of like the. mm, I don't know if it's an observation,
Right.
you
I'm
know.
not saying like they're like pointing fingers.
Well, I mean, they wouldn't be afraid to point fingers either,
Right.
right? But
Yeah.
but no, I think it's kind of hard to point fingers because this is just this was kind of a because of what Rehoboam did and really caused a division of the kingdom. And remember, Jeroboam was like a political rival who's hiding out,
Right.
a political rival of Solomon who's hiding out, waiting for Solomon's son to make a mistake, and he did. And it's a I don't know, it's a consequence of God's people going after, other gods, wanting to be like the other nations. But you remember that God himself called for the anointing of Jeroboam
Okay.
in First Kings.
Yeah.
So God is the one who made that who had Jeroboam anointed. Doesn't
Right.
mean he liked Jeroboam, doesn't mean he thought Jeroboam was going to be some great king. But he is the one who had him anointed.
Right. Okay, that makes a lot more sense then.
So yeah, back to 21. Or if you go back to 19, Judah also did not keep the commandments of the Lord their God, but walked in their customs that Israel had introduced. Right? Because remember, we've been talking this whole time about how some of the northern kingdom stuff makes its way into
Right.
the southern
Yeah.
kingdom. So the stuff from Israel goes into Judah. Part of that's through Jezebel's family, right,
Right.
and Ahab's family. And even after their family is deposed from the northern kingdom, now they've made a kind of a headway
Yeah.
into the southern kingdom,
Right.
right? And the Lord rejected all the descendants of Israel and afflicted them and gave them into the hands of plunderers until he had cast them out of his sight. When he had torn Israel from the house of David, they made Jeroboam, son of Nebat, king, and Jeroboam drove Israel from following the Lord and made them commit great sin. The people of Israel walked in all the sins that Jeroboam did. They did not depart from them until the Lord removed Israel out of his sight, as he had spoken by all his servants, the prophets. So Israel was exiled from their own land to Assyria until this day. Okay?
So it's almost because since you said Jeroboam was appointed by God, it's almost as if that was his plan.
Well, at some level, it was his plan because it's what happened,
Right.
right? So he's a sovereign God. So, but also you have to remember that God, people talk about the difference an observable difference between God in the Old Testament and God in the New Testament, right?
Right.
Now, I think that's probably overplayed in a lot of ways because the God of the Old Testament isn't just, scary and angry. He's also loving and merciful.
Right.
And then when Jesus comes on the scene, he's not just loving and merciful. He's got a little bit of fire to him,
Right,
right?
yeah.
He's ask the scribes and the Pharisees if he's loving and
Yeah, right,
kind,
yeah.
right? Woe to you. But anyway, what is different, and this is what you see in the New Testament. I'm thinking especially of like Colossians 1:15, that Jesus is the full revelation of God in a way that he did not reveal himself in the Old Testament.
Okay, yeah.
And that's really important because what you see here is you see God's at work, but he's at work in a very hidden way.
Right.
He's at work behind the scenes. And is it odd that he would raise up the Israelite army to bring judgment upon the nations around them? Well, the other nations, they go to war with each other.
Right.
And you find out over the course of the Old Testament that God's he's the one that's rising up nations to bring judgment on other nations.
Right. Yeah.
And you've got some, so we know Israel, he's revealed that through the prophets that Israel is doing this, right? You also know that he raises up Assyria to wipe out Israel.
Right.
Right? And it's not that this is like the way that God desires to operate, that he hasn't revealed that to us. He's revealed to us that this is a part of humanity's fall into sin, and that humanity desires to operate this way.
Okay.
And so what God does is, in his working behind the scenes in a very hidden way, he brings about judgment on peoples through humanity's evil desires. And so we all, we all deserve death. And so he raises up a nation and judges another nation.
Right.
And then he raises up a different nation and judges that nation. And then that nation gets judged by another one. And this is all this goes back to Genesis 11 with the Tower of Babel, that this is humanity seeks out power, seeks out authority, and it seeks it over and against other human beings.
Right.
And so so God calls Israel, he uses them to judge the nations of Canaan, but he also calls them away from being like the other nations of the world.
Okay.
Now, what does Israel want? They want to be just like everybody else.
Right, yeah.
They want to be Babel, right?
Right, yeah.
And of course, what ends up happening is first Assyria, but then Babylon itself, the place of Babel, comes in, and God uses Babylon to judge them.
Right.
Right? It's very ironic. The whole thing is very
yeah.
ironic. And so then what happens is then God fully reveals himself in Jesus, and it's like, look, this is not how you're supposed to live.
Right.
And so that's why you get this, what seems to be a disconnect. But if you understand the salvation history and read through the whole salvation history, you realize that God is not doing anything different. In the Old Testament, he's not doing anything different from what the rest of the world is already doing as far as judgment goes.
Right.
But then finally he reveals himself and is like, look, I'm sending my spirit to be with you, because he took his spirit away in Genesis 6. I'm sending my spirit to be with you. My son, who is also, he's fully human, fully God, is now as a human being and as God is going to reign over heaven and earth. Everything's going to change. We're not going to have any, we're not going to, if you're a part of the kingdom of heaven, you're being called away from these worldly
Right.
judgment plays. Now, this is the kind of the part that's difficult for us, is that God is still sovereign over the nations, and in a hidden way, he still is overseeing the judgment of the nations.
Okay, yeah.
One nation judging another.
Right.
But as Christians, we say, okay, God, that's something that you're doing in a way that you have not revealed to us. So
Right.
we're not going to, we can't try to look behind the curtain and see what he's up to. We can't try to delve into the mysteries of the hidden God. We wouldn't want to say things like, well, God raised up this nation to judge this nation because this modern nation to judge this other modern nation because he hasn't told us that.
Right. Okay.
He's revealed that a little bit of the picture in the Old Testament, so we know he does it.
Right.
But we're not going to walk around and say, oh, this war is happening because God wants this, and this war is happening because God wants this, because he hasn't revealed that to us.
Yeah.
Right. And so what we as Christians do, then we look to Jesus, how he has fully revealed himself, and we live our lives based off of that full revelation.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So here this is just God bringing judgment on one people group, and then the Assyrians are going to be judged by the Babylonians, and the Babylonians are going to be judged by the Persians, and and just
one after another.
And that's what the book of Daniel is about.
Okay.
So, yeah. So yeah, this is actually I never thought about 2 Kings 17 is really a great chapter to really get a summary of the whole picture of what happens from 1 Samuel all the way to 2 Kings.
That's honestly what I was thinking as I was reading. It was like almost like a conclusion.
Or summary?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also you had mentioned like people see it, they distinguish the Old Testament God between the New Testament God.
Yeah.
And I think has a lot to do with like say you're, for example, working at a job and the owner of the company comes in to tell you like something's happening or you need to start doing this or doing that. You'd be more inclined to do that than you would if they were just like sent you a letter,
What do you mean by that? More specifically?
I'm saying humans have like a different viewpoint, I guess, on God as a God who would, or like how Jesus came on earth and walked alongside us. People would be more empathetic to that.
Yeah.
So to speak.
Well, yeah, he's not. Yeah, he's not at a distance, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. People, God, why don't you just write your name in the sky? And it's like,
Yeah.
He literally like enfleshed himself,
Right.
and became one of us and talked to us. Like it's better than the sky.
Exactly.
And then he died and then came back to life and said,
and honestly, that's also a show on humans, how we perceive things.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that's right. The first gospel proclamation Jesus makes is the kingdom of heaven is at hand. It's like the kingdom of heaven is looking you right in the face.
Right.
It's here, right? So he says, repent, turn, have a change of mind. That's what that means.
Right.
And believe this good news, because it is good news. And yeah, God shows up when he wants to make things clear.
Right.
He shows up and he makes it clear. But we have a way as human beings to explain it away and still find fault with God.
Twisted all kinds of different ways.
Yeah, that's right.
So next I have verses 29 through 33, chapter 17. It's just kind of observation when the Assyrians came into Israel. Nevertheless, each national group made its own gods in the several towns where they settled, and set them up in the shrines of people. The people of Samaria had made at the high places. The people from Babylon made Succoth-Benoth. Those from Cutha made Nergal, and those from Hamath made Ashima. The Avites made Nipaz and Tartak, and the Sepharvites burned their children in the fire as sacrifices to Ajamelech and Anamelech, the gods of the Sepharvaim. Anyways, I was kind of just looking at that, and I'm like, the Assyrians, they're talked bad about throughout the entire book of Kings, but the Israelites are really no better than they are.
Yeah.
In the ways that they worship all the different gods.
Yeah. So they, in some ways, that's very true. But this is also other people groups being brought in
that's
too.
Right, yeah.
Right. So yeah, but it does kind of go to show you that Assyria is the first great world empire.
Right.
And it has this really big umbrella, and it's just moving people groups around under its empire, right? And so it's going to move out Israel, and it's going to put some other small nation, small people group,
Right.
same size of Israel, that is going to put them into Israel now.
Right.
And so the land's going to be filled with all these other false gods now. Yeah. So, but it does go to show that when Israel or when Assyria comes, Israel gets treated just like any other nation.
Right.
Any other nation. And which is it's interesting because, if you read through the book of Isaiah, Isaiah deals with Assyria and Babylon quite a bit.
Okay,
because
yeah.
Isaiah is living during this time period.
Right.
Or during this time period. And what you see is you get two different pictures. You get one picture of human empire and the power plays and the way that human beings try to overcome each other through the threat of death, right? And so Assyria wants to conquer the world.
Right.
Like they literally want to conquer the world, and that's what they think they're doing. And they managed to do that for a large portion of it.
Right.
And then you have it's Isaiah, this juxtaposition of Assyria conquering the world through broken, sinful human means. And then it's juxtaposed with God and God's reign over the whole world and how God wants to bring all people to himself. But those means are completely different than the
Right.
Assyrian means.
Yeah. Almost like polar opposites.
Polar opposites. So, Assyria is going to conquer and kill and destroy and move people groups around, and that's how world empires work. The way that God does it is through God suffers with his people.
Okay.
And you see that throughout all of Isaiah, especially the last parts of Isaiah with the songs about the suffering servant. God's people suffer, and he suffers too. And through his suffering and through the suffering of his people, he brings all people to himself.
Okay.
Right? So it's like the polar opposite of Assyria.
Right.
And so really this is something I think is missed a lot in the Old Testament, is that Assyria is set up and Babylon are set up as like the big antagonists,
Right.
rightfully so, but the juxtaposition with how God does things versus Assyria and Babylon, that's the part that I wish we talked about more.
Well, yeah, and also I think that perfectly ties into how I was saying if God came down, humans would be more empathetic to that.
Right.
And
Right.
yeah, that fits in perfectly.
Right. And when we kind of go away from God, then what happens, what we even as Christians do, we kind of start acting like the worldly empires again.
Right. Yeah.
And we go back to our old ways.
Right.
And that's what's happened
And
in a lot of the history of the church.
And I've thought about this too. It's they're worshiping all these different gods, and like we don't worship necessarily bow down and worship other gods, but we do other things. We put other things before God.
Yeah, flesh that out a little bit more.
Like you want me to explain more?
Yeah.
Like I don't know. We'll put things before something that we could do for God, because
Okay.
like we'd rather do this or we'd rather do that, and that's almost the same thing as worshiping another God.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah, that's right. You've got 24 hours in a day.
Right.
You've got a limited amount of resources that God has placed you as a steward over.
Right.
And so what do you do with those time and resources that God has completely given to you?
Exactly.
Right? And yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, we don't have some little statue in our house, and we have
Right.
have a funny name for it, Molech or something like that.
I got a little Xbox.
That's right. Well, that's right. I got a little Xbox. Yeah, yeah. Or I've got I don't know, a bank account that I worship, or
Right. Yeah.
just name it.
Yeah.
right?
Even things that you think is just everyday life.
That's right. So yeah. No, this is I think this whole chapter is very, very telling, and yeah, God flips the whole imperial image on its head.
Right.
And says, now I'm going to conquer, and I'm going to do it differently. And of course, when he shows up, how does he do it? Well, he suffers.
Right.
And then he's raised back to life. He defeats death, which means that the mechanism that the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and all the other worldly kingdoms are using. That's death is the biggest thing they can threaten.
Right.
That's how they rule. And God says it's a non-issue now.
I never thought of it like that at all.
He completely takes away their weapon. Says non-issue.
Right.
And that's how he conquers.
Did you want to keep going? I figured you could cut that
Yeah, let's
out.
keep
Okay.
going. Let's do a
Sounds
couple
good.
more.
So moving on to chapter 18,
Okay.
verse 8. When Hezekiah, so I'll read a little bit further back.
Yep.
Hezekiah trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel. There was no one like him among all the kings of Judah, either him, before him or after him. He held fast to the Lord and did not stop following him. He kept the commands the Lord had given Moses, and the Lord was with him. He was successful in whatever he undertook. He rebelled against the king of Assyria and did not serve him. From watchtower to fortified city, he defeated the Philistines as far as Gaza and its territory. I read about Samson not too long ago, and so
Okay.
I'm wondering if that is any significance with taking back the Philistines. Have they been at war, so to speak?
Yeah.
then?
Well, yeah. Really, Hezekiah he's really the only one who does overcome the Philistines. So he
Okay.
said Samson. We don't really know when the Philistines showed up. I think the archaeological record maybe goes back to the 13th century, maybe, for the Philistines.
Okay.
And now Abraham deals with the Philistines in the 19th century. Now, there is an archaeological record that reflects that, but that's what Genesis says. So,
Right.
but the Philistines were on the coasts, and so they had 3 cities that were in Gaza, and then 2 cities further north, and Tyre and Sidon are associated with them.
Okay. Yeah.
Ashkelon and Ashdod and in the Gaza Strip, what we call the Gaza Strip today,
Right.
are associated with them. And they're associated with the Sea People, and no one really knows who the Sea People are.
Is that just what was written down?
Yeah, well, yeah. They're people that came from the sea. I think it's an Egyptian king who calls them the Sea People.
Okay,
War with the Sea People, and they're associated with maybe the Phoenicians,
Okay.
who are going around the Mediterranean coast. But again, there's a lot of, and they really, in the 12th century BC, it seems like that's when they really make their move in the area.
Okay.
Egypt, Israel, and even a little bit north of that. So, but anyway, so even as far back as Abraham in Genesis, you can see that they're there on the coast.
Right.
And so when Abraham's whole family goes to Egypt, they're enslaved for over 400 years, and then they come back to Canaan, and they're supposed to conquer all the people, and they don't. And this is a big part of what the book of Judges is about.
Right.
And so you have Samson, so you've the Moabites and other groups that they're fighting against, the Jebusites, the Amalekites, the Ammonites, and all these different groups that are there. The Hittites are there, and they're in Turkey. The Hittite, that was a very powerful kingdom,
Okay.
In the Bronze Age, late Bronze Age. But so Israel's fighting all these people groups. They never really conquered the Philistines. They
Right,
never
yeah,
really
you
took the
never-
Gaza Strip. And so you see Samson's, that's his main,
Right.
yeah.
his revenge.
Oh my gosh, yes, his, marrying Philistine wives,
Right.
and it's just a chaotic. Samson is like the anti-hero judge. He's like the anti-judge, just big chaotic mess.
It almost feels like it shouldn't be in the Bible.
Well, yeah, there's a few things. Judges, especially the end of Judges, is kind of. It's like that, but no, Samson, his name in Hebrew is Shamashon, and it's actually the base word is Shamesh, which means sun, and in his whole life there's so much fire, when he's going to be born, there's a sacrifice that's offered. His first wife is burned. He remember the thing he does with the foxes in the Philistine village. He ties the tails of foxes together and put the torches in them. I don't know how you do that, but he did it and sends them in. And so he's like a force of nature.
Right.
He's like the sun man. He's a force of nature. And he fights the Philistines, and then David obviously fights the Philistines. At one point, David, when he's on the run from Saul, joins them, right? I guess the enemy of my enemy is my friend or
Right.
something. But of course, Goliath is a infamous Philistine.
Right.
His whole family you hear about later on as well. His brothers, who are also like giants. And so anyway, so yeah, the Philistines are just there. They never really got conquered by the Israelites.
Right.
So they've just kind of been hanging out there. And so Hezekiah finally does it. I mean, and you kind of have to wonder to like what extent was he able to do it? I don't know.
And it's weird because it's only one. I mean, it probably gets talked about later, but it's only one verse.
Yeah. What verse is that, by the way? What?
18 verse 8. It was from watchtower to fortified city, he defeated the Philistines as far as Gaza and its territory. And that's all it says.
That's it, right?
Yeah.
So, and of course, Philistine is, etymologically, it's in Hebrew it's plishtim, and that is where we get our modern word Palestine from.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, well, I knew it was the same.
Right, it's the same area.
Right.
It's the Gaza Strip. It's been the Gaza Strip for like thousands of years,
Right.
So.
Well, yeah, and I saw a map. It was I think it was World War II map, and it still had that whole area said Canaan.
Yeah.
And I was
right.
like, yeah, and I've never heard it referred to as Canaan, but I
Yeah.
guess it just up until recently it was.
Well, that whole area was it was just ruled by empires.
Right.
So it's it's ruled by the Assyrian Empire, then the Babylonian Empire, then the kind of the Persian Empire, then the Greek Empire, and that gets split up into the between the Seleucid Greeks and the Ptolemaic Greeks, Seleucids in Persia, Ptolemaic Greeks in Egypt, and then the Pompey, the Roman general, comes and in the into the first half of the first century BC and conquers them, and then and it becomes a part of the Roman Republic, and then the Roman Empire.
Right.
And then it becomes a part of the Byzantine Empire. Then you have the Arabic conquests, and then it's part of the eventually like the Ottoman Empire, and then Britain comes and becomes a part of the British Empire, and then after World War II,
it was just giving back.
Kind of. I mean, they tried to figure out what to do with it, right? And so then you had modern nation states of Israel and Palestine,
Right.
But up until that time, it was just underneath one empire after another.
Well, kind of like Europe almost, because I saw when Europe was under the Holy Roman Empire.
Yeah.
And it was just like little Christian tribes getting conquered by everyone.
Well,
And pagan tribes too.
Pagan tribes, Charlemagne wanted to push Christianity by the sword, by worldly means, right? It's like, all right, well, that's so anyway, that's what there's one little line here, and but Hezekiah himself was he was raised by Isaiah.
Okay.
So when Hezekiah is born, Isaiah's been around for some time,
Right.
and he's older, and Hezekiah becomes king when he's real young, and Isaiah raises him up to be a faithful king to Yahweh.
Okay, yeah.
And Hezekiah gets rid of they find the book of the law, with the Torah, which they hadn't been using for a long time, and he makes all these changes. He does all this really good stuff. He gets rid of the high places. He does all this stuff that he's supposed to be doing, right? And then he kind of but it's already in the cards. Babylon is already going to attack, or Syria is already going to attack. Then the Babylonians kind of come in at the end of his reign, and Isaiah's like, "What are you doing? Don't let them in and see all the gold of the temple." Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I remember reading that a while ago when he let them in.
But yeah, Hezekiah. Remember, it's under Hezekiah that Sennacherib, the general who becomes king of Assyria, has this massive army right outside of Jerusalem,
Right.
And it's under Hezekiah that God saves them and preserves Jerusalem
Right.
from the Assyrians, because the Assyrians at that point they've got all the northern kingdom, they got pretty much all the southern kingdom too,
Yeah.
and just not
Kind of just
Jerusalem.
not. Yeah.
Yeah.
That kind of brings me to my last question.
Okay.
When the field commander was outside the gates.
Yeah, and he speaks Hebrew to him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want me to go ahead and read it?
Yeah, go for it.
Alrighty.
What verse? Chapter and verse.
Chapter 19 or chapter 18, verse 19.
Okay.
The field commander said to them, "Tell Hezekiah, this is what the great king of the king of Assyria says. On what are you basing this confidence of yours? You say you have the counsel and the might for war, but you speak only empty words. On whom are you depending, that you rebel against me? Look, I know you are depending on Egypt, that splintered reed of a staff, which pierces the hand of anyone who leans on it. Such is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to all who depend on him. But if you say to me, we are depending on the Lord our God, isn't he the one whose high places and altars Hezekiah removed, saying to Judah and Jerusalem, you must worship before this altar in Jerusalem? Come now, make a bargain with my master, the king of Assyria. I will give you 2,000 horses, if you can put riders on them. How can you repulse one officer of the least of my master's officials, even though you are depending on Egypt for chariots and horsemen? Furthermore, I have come to attack and destroy this place without word from the Lord. The Lord himself told me to march against this country and destroy it."
Okay.
Is he trying to turn the people on Hezekiah, or was he
Yes.
was he also like told, because the Israelites, they taught them how to worship the Lord and whatnot. Whenever I have to go up and find
Go
that.
back.
They ended up bringing a priest. It might be over in 17. Yeah, go to 17, around 33.
Okay. Well, this is just the story.
Well, yeah, but when the Assyrians came in, it said that, okay, yeah, or 27, I'm sorry.
27.
Yeah, 17, verse 27.
And the king of Assyria commanded, send there one of the priests whom you carried away from there, and let him go and dwell there and teach the law of the God of that land. So one of the so we're still going to have Yahweh worship there.
Yeah, but I'm saying, was he taught, because he said
This guy, no. I mean,
he wasn't taught wrong. He knows what he's doing.
Well, no, what he's saying, is it true?
No.
Right? See, it's interesting because he clearly has he is a messenger from the king,
Right.
and the king of Assyria to the king of Jerusalem. It's not even Judah at this point, basically.
Right,
It's just
yeah.
Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And he clearly has a very misunderstood. His perspective is not how things actually are.
Okay, yeah.
He's looking at it through an Assyrian lens.
Okay.
Which I think is really important. Just when you read the Bible, you realize this, that people are reading things through or seeing these through a certain lens. So
Right.
so he says, look, he is convinced that Hezekiah is confident because Hezekiah is leaning on Egypt.
Right.
And Egypt, of course, is also a force to be reckoned with. Egypt, in a lot of ways, kind of seems to be isolationist at this time,
Right.
at least from the Asian empires and Asian kingdoms. But he thinks, oh, you're just going to rely on Egypt, and he makes the comment, don't you know that Egypt pierces the hand of anyone who leans on it?
Right.
Don't you know that that if anyone who relies on Egypt, they always come back to bite you?
Right.
That's his perspective of, as an Assyrian, what Egypt is like.
Okay.
So you get the sense now, you realize that there's some bad blood between Assyria and Egypt.
Right.
They don't like each other. They don't get along with each other.
Like
and
brothers.
Yeah, that's right. And so he's saying, look, you need to come under us. Don't make us spill your blood, because the Egyptians are not going to protect you the way they think you are, and you're going to be under our umbrella anyway.
Right.
Okay. And then he says, verse 22, 18, verse 22, but if you say to me, we trust in the Lord our God, is it not he whose high places and altars Hezekiah has removed, saying to Judah and to Jerusalem, you shall worship before this altar in Jerusalem? So what's the misunderstanding?
That's what we talked about last time, how people would go to the high places
Yeah.
for like freedom of worship rather
Okay.
than being forced to go to Jerusalem.
So from the Assyrian perspective, what is Hezekiah doing? See, from the Assyrian perspective, that's where you worship Yahweh.
Okay, yeah.
There's
Right.
this is a high place to Yahweh. This is a high place to Yahweh. This is a high place to Yahweh. And Hezekiah comes in and gets rid of them. And the
So,
Assyrians are
yeah,
going,
that's just what they've seen, basically.
That's
Not,
just
not
what
what
they've
they've
seen.
told or what anything. Just yeah.
yeah, well,
I see what you're saying.
and
now,
so
yeah.
they're saying, you're saying you trust in Yahweh. Why are you getting rid of all these high places?
Right.
And of course, Hezekiah, he would say something like, well, Yahweh didn't ever wanted the high places in the first place.
Yeah.
He wanted us to worship at the temple in Jerusalem.
Right.
Right. But this Assyrian doesn't get it.
Right.
And it's really important, I think, when just reading through the Bible, is that these are people that they don't have the big picture.
Right.
He's looking at this through an Assyrian lens. And so he doesn't understand. He doesn't understand why. And of course, the people love the high places. Remember, the other kings didn't want to take them down because the people loved them so
Right,
much,
yeah,
right?
political.
And so Hezekiah is very audacious for Hezekiah to get rid of them in the first place.
Right.
Right. He wasn't a people pleaser, but he was a good king.
Right.
And so then he makes this little, verse 23. Come now, make a wager with my master, the king of Assyria. I will give you 2,000 horses if you are able on your part to set riders on them. So
He's kind of like teasing them.
yeah, I'll give you the horses if you can even if you even have enough cavalrymen you can ride them.
Right.
How then can you repulse a single captain among the least of my master's servants when you trust in Egypt for chariots and for horsemen? So you don't even have your own army.
Right.
You're trusting Egypt's army. Now, is that true? I don't know. I don't think it is, but it could. I mean, it could be.
Right.
And so again, Judah's just caught in the middle between
Yeah.
Assyria and Egypt, and
Well, yeah, and it's also I didn't realize that how Egypt and Assyria were when it said that Israel had made or started paying their whatever penance to Egypt rather than to Assyria.
oh yeah, it's a big deal,
Yeah,
right?
I didn't know how, like it was that type of relationship between the two.
Oh yeah, and so they just assume that everyone in that area is just
Right,
paying
yeah.
the Egyptians for protection.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's very normal for something for this kind of for how they operate here. These big empires, they've got these little vassal kingdoms, and they have to send tribute every year. And
Right.
they send, and then the people bring them in every year. They have to go to you can actually see the palace in Nineveh has pictures on the wall of people from all these other nations bringing tribute to the king of Assyria
Okay,
once a
yeah.
year.
That's cool.
I mean, you can see it. I mean, it's been excavated. You can see it. It's kind of
Right.
and so that's what they're dealing with.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And it's almost like because they had all these different languages at play, like the Assyrians don't speak Hebrew,
Right.
and so it was almost I think it's thought that the pictures on the wall were basically showing you, okay, this is what you do in this room.
Right.
This is what you do. You take your own, the clothes of your kingdom off, and you put this robe on.
Right.
And you're all going to wear the same robe, bringing tribute to the king of Assyria.
Right.
Like that's what it's like. It's
like a,
fascinating.
Like a danger sign or something, how it's universal.
Yeah, that's universal. Yeah, it's the pictures. Okay, so when they come to bring the tribute, what do we do? All right,
Right.
this is what we do, and all the nations have to do this, and then they have their big procession and present their gifts to the king of Assyria. And Judah was doing that for a little while,
Okay, yeah.
and after Hezekiah, Judah has to do that.
Right.
So, yep.
Well, yeah, that's all I had for today.
Okay, cool. Well, again, we're coming up to the end here pretty soon,
Oh, yeah.
and
These were two packed chapters, I would say.
yeah,
think.
yeah, they're and yeah, we're almost to the end of Second Kings, but yeah, there's a lot that happens here, and a lot I think that people are not familiar with because these don't make it into the Sunday school lessons,
Right.
right? These don't. We're not talking about tributes and all that
Yeah, and
stuff.
going to
and-
war and
Yeah.
but the group that fed or put the children in the fire for as a sacrifice.
Right, right. And so they, we don't talk about this stuff, but this is real, stuff and that they have to deal with, and it's actually it's a major turning point in the Old Testament.
Right.
And I was teaching a class yesterday evening, and one of my students made the comment because we're actually going through the prophets.
Okay,
We're
yeah.
talking about Isaiah, and we're talking about the second half of Second Kings because we're talking about Isaiah. And the student said something like, I didn't realize there was so much politics in the Bible. And I said, well, yeah, yes, we're dealing with kingdoms.
Right.
And in some sense, even the gospel message is political, not worldly politics, but Jesus comes and says, the kingdom of heaven is at hand.
Right. Yeah.
Right? So that is a political statement. Again, it doesn't fit into our little worldly politics, especially not like our American politics.
yeah.
But it's like there's the kingdoms of the world, and then there's the kingdom of heaven.
Right.
And it's a different ruler, a different kind of a reign, a different way of seeing life. In fact, with all of our differences, not to go into any of this, but to all of the differences in our national politics or in our world politics, when you compare those to the kingdom of heaven, they all just look the same.
Right. Yeah.
They all look the same, right? It's all power plays. It's all,
Yeah.
threat of death. It's all, so anyway. But yeah, okay, very good. Well, we'll pick up next time. So thank you for your questions.
Yeah. Thank you.
And thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.